Annual Business Forecast Conference. I am Kobe King. I'm the President and CEO of a small public affairs firm called High Point Strategies, and also the Chairman of the Board of VICA. So very happy to be here, and always enjoy moderating the transportation panel, and I think we're going to have a great time today. I'd like to thank our track sponsors today, Caruso Affiliated and Southwest Airlines, as well as our panel sponsors, Kinkishario and Lyft. A little bit of housekeeping. You all see those little pink slips in front of you. That's an exit survey for this panel. Really encourage you to please fill it out at the end of the panel session, return it to the VICA staff or VICA intern or VICA ambassador at the back of the room, or at the registration booth in the foyer. We really value your feedback. We read every single one of these, and we actually discuss them to figure out how we can make this event better. One thing that I will note that we've done this year, which is a big improvement, is that we have microphones for each of our speakers so that we're not passing the microphones back and forth as we've done in past years. So that's good. There is a lot going on in transportation in Los Angeles County and in the San Fernando Valley. I often refer to the time we live in as a golden era for transportation investment in the county, and we're hoping in the valley as well. And we've got a fantastic panel lined up. The biographies of each of the panelists are already in your journal. I encourage you to take a look and read their introductions, but I'm just going to introduce them very quickly, and then we're going to move right into the discussion. Down at the end, we have Veronica Juarez. She's the Director of Government Relations for Lyft. And then immediately to her left, Denny Zane, Executive Director of Move LA. Coming closer toward me, Los Angeles City Council member and Metro Board member, Paul Krikorian, a longtime leader on transportation issues in the Valley. And then finally, just to my right, Martin Wax, Professor Emeritus, UCLA, go Bruins, and Senior Principal Research at RAND Corporation. Unfortunately, Baruch Feigenbaum had a family emergency and wasn't able to make it today. So the way we're going to start is I'm going to give each of the panelists just a couple of minutes to make an opening statement, and then we're going to ask some questions of each of you, and then open it up to questions from the audience. So Martin, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about your perspective on transportation right now.
Well, this morning at the breakfast,
I want you speaking to
is it not on?
It's on, but
I'm not
you've got to
close
pull it
enough.
a little closer.
Okay. This morning at the breakfast, we heard that we're in the midst of a recovery, and that it's a modest but steady recovery, growth in economic activity, and a modest growth in population in the valley and in the region as a whole. Together, those things mean some growth in vehicle miles of travel, in truck traffic, as well as passenger traffic, and we're already, most of us, aware of a very high level of congestion in relation to many other cities. And I think it's reasonable to say with our shift to more fuel-efficient vehicles, which is good for greenhouse gases and global warming issues, it's not good for revenue, since most of our transportation revenue comes from motor fuel taxes. So we face a modestly increasing, I wouldn't call it yet a crisis, an increase in traffic congestion, and definitely a financial crisis in the ability to raise the funds we need to improve, maintain, even just to maintain and operate the transportation system. In order to deal with this, we're moving ahead on several fronts, and I think this region has benefits greatly from a partnership between the city, the county, the state, in all participating in together, pretty much working together as well as they have at any time in the last 40 or 50 years. We're, of course, improving the transit system, and that will, the new construction, that will have benefits. We're also focusing on increasing the livability of the region, and that means better pedestrian and cycling facilities, which we're investing in very, very aggressively. And we're seeing the growth of alternative modes, and we'll hear more about Lyft in a few minutes. But it still leaves us with the highway system. The street system is a backbone of the transportation system. Its condition is deteriorating, and traffic is worsening. And the way we're not going to have the funds, nor the political will, nor will we tolerate the environmental impacts and the community disruption from building additional new capacity like 8-lane freeways anywhere in Los Angeles in the coming 20 or 30 years. We might finish the 710. That's a debate that we could have later, whether its benefits are worth its cost. But even if that project is done, it's one of it's a small impact on the whole system. So the emphasis, I think, in the next 15 or 20 years will be on getting greater efficient use out of the street system to complement the transit benefits, which I know others on the panel are going to talk about. And that means doing more things like the hot lanes, which both produce revenue that's absolutely needed for the transportation system and manage the traffic flow to get more, to give the driver more options. And we will soon see smart parking in a similar manner in more and more locations around the city, varying the price of parking to encourage more availability of parking spaces in the busiest places which have the highest turnover, and an available parking space actually means less congestion, since in business areas and high-density residential areas, sometimes as much as a third or 40% of the traffic is people circulating looking for parking spaces. So the emphasis will be on efficiency. The emphasis will be on finding alternative modes of financing transportation. And the last thing I'll say is just this week, the governor signed SB 1077, which will begin the process of studying a successor to the motor fuel tax as a principal means for financing transportation. We're going to be looking at what some people call road user charges, some people call mileage-based user fees, but essentially it's paying for the use of the roads on an as-used basis through electronic monitoring in the vehicle. It's very controversial, highly threatening to some people about privacy issues and so on, but it's also true that we need to find alternative forms of revenue to move this transportation program forward.
Thank you. Councilman?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kobe. Thank you, VICA, for bringing us together today to talk about probably the most pressing issue that we have to contend with right now in the San Fernando Valley. And I look around the table here and I see many people that I've had a chance to work with, many people who are very immersed in transportation policy. So rather than taking the time now to talk about details of what we have ahead of us, which I'm sure we'll do in question and answer, I want to take a second to look back, because I'm a third-generation Valley resident. The entire time that I was growing up here, I remember the stereotype of the Valley being a car-centric culture, and in many ways we have been. We were the home of the hot rodders and you know, the suburban sprawl and all of the things that come with a focus on cars. And I think that history of the last few decades has tended to cloud people's view of the future of the San Fernando Valley. So I'd suggest we look back a few more decades and think about the history of the San Fernando Valley, which changed from the ranchos to an agricultural area with the arrival of the railroads. The city of San Fernando began because of the railroads, and the urbanization of the San Fernando Valley spread from there. When my mom was growing up here, it was very easy for her to hop on a red car and get anywhere in Los Angeles. Took a while. I mean, the you know, rosy lenses of history make those things a little bit better than they probably were. Everybody talks about how great the red cars were, and it's great that we had it, but it was slow. But we had it. And the point is that the success of the San Fernando Valley, in many ways, has been tied to transit. Now, our growth since the late 50s or so has come because of cars and freeways. But as the professor points out, we have maxed that out. We've maxed out our capacity. We're not going to be building any freeway. I mean, realistically, we're not going to be building any big freeway projects anytime soon. So how do we deal with that? And I think that comes back to Kobe's initial comment, which is that this is our golden age for transit, if we make it so. The next few years will decide the next half century for the San Fernando Valley. What we do in the next few years in planning a system that serves the people of the valley and that brings together many disparate pieces of our transit system into one cohesive, user-friendly, usable system is going to decide whether or not we can continue to flourish, or whether we're going to continue to be dependent upon failing streets and congested streets. So we have that opportunity right now. We're looking at a new sales tax measure in a couple of years. I'm sure Denny's going to talk about that some more. But it's incumbent upon us to stand up all of the stakeholders of the San Fernando Valley right now and make sure that the San Fernando Valley is central to that discussion. Because the last time we did this, excuse the pun, but we got left at the station. The San Fernando Valley in Measure R got crumbs. And in the next iteration of that, I've made very clear to everybody who will listen is that, in my view, my political view, there is no chance that any sales tax measure will pass in this county without the strong, very strong support of the San Fernando Valley. And that's only going to come if the stakeholders of this valley agree that there is benefit to the valley commensurate or greater than its cost to the valley. So we have a lot to do. When you look at throughout our metro system, we have 88 miles of rail right now, and we're building more all the time, and that's great. It's great that we're right now in the midst of this tremendous growth in metro of our transit system. 88 miles of rail, and of those 88 miles, 3 of them are in the San Fernando Valley. We have 80 rail stops in the metro system. 2 of them are in the valley, a place that serves a place with a population of 2 million people. 20% or more of the population of the county. And as I say, we have not received our share of infrastructure investment when it comes to transit. So when you, just coming back to the stereotype about the valley again being car-centric, if you needed any more proof that that stereotype that valley residents will never get out of their cars, if you needed any more proof of the falsity of that stereotype, go with me today and ride on the Orange Line and see the 30,000 boardings that we have on that Orange Line, making it one of the most successful bus lines in the entire system, and even a line that surpasses some of our light rail passenger boardings. So it's been fabulously successful. It's been kind of a victim of its own success, because we're now at the point of the limits of its capacity. And so one of the things that I've been pressing for, and I'm very proud that VICA has been a leader on this, and Kobe is one of the most outspoken advocates of these measures that we're looking at, to expand capacity on the Orange Line. Possible conversion to a light rail system from the BRT. Possible changing of vehicles in another way, grade separation. There's a number of different steps that we can do in order to increase speed, increase capacity, and increase convenience on the Orange Line. The other thing that we're going to need to look to do is increase its connectivity. So right across the street, you see the beautiful new Bob Hope Airport Ritzy. It's been long-awaited, important piece of this transit system, and yet you can't get to it from the Red Line or the Orange Line unless you call and get a super shuttle to pick you up. That's absurd.
Or a lift, of course.
Well, okay. But super shuttle does it for free, so thanks to Metro. So we have to fix that. We have to make a connection between that North Hollywood station and the Ritzy, and then points east. And we have an opportunity with this new sales tax measure, if we're smart about it, and if we're forceful about it, and if we lead on this, to have the possibility of a one-seat ride from Chatsworth to Pasadena and points well east of there, to really connect the system in a way that's going to make it user-friendly. And I think that as you get those increases in speed, increases in convenience, and increases in connectivity, you're going to have geometric increases in ridership as well. And that's what we're going to need in order to really change the game of transportation in the San Fernando Valley.
Thank you, Councilman. Denny?
Yes, I really would like to encourage everybody to pick up the same theme that Councilmember Krikorian just articulated, that this is a moment of significant opportunity. And I think we should feel that in part because the fundamentals for the November 2016 election look pretty good, better than certainly 2008 when we succeeded. One of the messages of the loss in 2012 of Measure J by a very narrow margin was really to confirm the victory in 2008. 2008 was not a fluke. There is a base, a two-thirds voter base in this county for investments of this sort. When you win in 2008 and have a near win in 2012, you should be thinking 2016 is opportunity. It'll be opportunity because it, like 2008, will have a very high turnout election. But there will be other things that will be occurring as well that will be much better. One is that our economy will be much better than 2008. Frankly, could hardly have been worse in 2008. Secondly, Metro will be operating 3 new systems, one of which is operating now, the extension of the Orange Line to Chatsworth, but also the Exposition Light Rail and the Foothill Gold Line will be up and operating at least by early 2016, maybe late 2015. I think that'll be exciting, promises made, promises kept, dynamic for voters, give confidence in the agency. In addition, the Crenshaw Line, the Regional Connector, and the Subway Line will be under construction. A remarkable effort on the part of Metro. I think it may be, this year may be the first time any agency in America will have 5 major projects under construction at the same time, thanks to voter support. But there are other fundamentals that I think that are quite good. The demographic shifts in the population between 08 and 16 shift toward populations more likely to support infrastructure investment. And in 2016, we will have, for the first time in California, Election Day voter registration. I keep thinking, what if we had polling places on community college campuses? And if there were an opportunity for student transit passes in the measure, wouldn't that bring out the winning margin? There are plenty of reasons to be optimistic, I think, about November 2016. But one of the other lessons is victory requires us to be ambitious. The San Fernando Valley, thinking about what it needs and wants in the measure to gain its support, is a dialogue that is occurring all over the county. You do not win 2/3 vote on a measure without doing very well everywhere. And so we need to be thinking about how we are partners, one with the other, in all parts of the county. And the only way we can provide the kind of enthusiasm and leadership and support for the South Bay, the San Gabriel Valley, as well as the San Fernando Valley is they have to see that the measure really matters to them and their voters as well. So we suggest, Move LA suggests that we think beyond Measure R. When we did Measure R, it was limited to 30 years for entirely political purposes, what may or may not have been necessary. One reason, of course, was that local media were saying they wouldn't support anything beyond 30 years. But all of those media also came around, LA Times, Daily News, and supported Measure J at 60 years. If we do a 45-year measure, for example, that would be a $90 billion revenue stream over 45 years. And that would enable, I think, us to have the kind of ambitious program that all parts of the county would really see meeting their needs. That's exactly the kind of political thinking we need to be doing. This is not a moment to be timid, it's a moment to be ambitious. Now, a half-cent sales tax, of course, is a burden, but it is about an 8 cents a day burden for each individual in the county. $700 million a year is about the audited revenue stream from a half-cent sales tax on Measure R. And we have 10 million people. It's about $70 a year. But LAEDC says residents pay about 42% of that fund. That's about $30 a day. Businesses and tourists pay a share as well, as we recall. So about 42% means about $30 a year for each resident, coming out to about 8 cents a day. Now, 8 cents a day is a modest investment for such a major transformational opportunity. It is time for us, I think, to think like we really are a grown-up metropolitan area, and time for us to put together the investment in the transit program that we need. The San Fernando Valley has several projects worthy of attention. One that was not mentioned by the council member, of course, is the project down the 405 and through the Sepulveda Pass. I think that should be on the table, even if there is no P3 toll road funding opportunity. We did it through the Cahuenga Pass to get to North Hollywood. We can consider that through Sepulveda Pass. And it's a matter really of, can we put together the coalitions? Can we put together the partnerships? Can we put together the momentum and the message at a moment in time when the fundamentals look better than 2008? Now, that's my charge to, I think, all of us, is that we work together, build a coalition, and think like we're a grown-up metropolitan area. Thank you.
Thank you, Denny. And finally, Veronica, talk a little bit about Lyft.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Veronica Juarez, Director of Government Relations at Lyft. So the road to Lyft actually began in 2007, and the mission is very simple. It's to fill all the empty seats on the road, to better use the assets that we have. So 80% of all seats in personal vehicles across the country are empty at all times. At Lyft, in the original company Zimride, the thought was if we could safely encourage and incentivize people to share those rides, we would create the most efficient transportation system we've ever seen. So that is what we're trying to do. Lyft is a peer-to-peer system, so it's very much rooted in community. The more people that use it, the more affordable it becomes, the better it works. So if more and more people are flipping in a driver mode on the driver's side and more people are using it as a passenger side, then we can do more things to match people in real time in a more of a carpooling manner. And we're working towards that, which I can talk about a little bit later. The way that we see Lyft in terms of fitting into a larger transportation pie, we see ourselves as only a piece, right? That in addition to public transit, to light rail, to bike share, Lyft can be another piece of that transportation puzzle. And maybe when folks have those extra options, then they delay that purchase of, maybe they have the option to delay a purchase of a first vehicle or delay the family purchase of the second vehicle. So owning a personal vehicle is the second highest household expense. And if there are more options and all of these initiatives are working together, then people have that flexibility. So we really, we're very new. We are only a couple of years old, but we are now operating in 70 markets, and the Los Angeles market is very exciting for us. It's our second largest market in the country. So we really look forward to working with the city, with stakeholders, with all of you, with the community on figuring out how we can best address the needs here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll turn to questions, but and I haven't done this in the past, but because this year has been such a special year for transportation, I do just want to very quickly just take 1 minute to review kind of what VICA has been doing on transportation. And a couple of years ago, when we started talking about converting the Orange Line to rail and the legal restraints on that, I had a conversation with a representative from Fran Pavley's office. One of the things that she said the center was concerned about is that, yeah, this is great that VICA's in favor of it, but what about the community? Have you gotten support for it? And we took the leadership team, and I'm glad to see Francine Ocean here, who's the chair of our transportation committee. We took that to heart, and the VICA staff and myself and Francine and a variety of other people really started working together to spread the spread the gospel of transportation infrastructure around the valley and created an organization called Valley on Track. And we came up with 3 things that we're working on. You've heard them all already. Convert the Orange Line to rail, or at least enhance capacity. The Van Nuys Boulevard line, which Metro is working on the EAR right now, we have to make sure that that's the highest possible mode, preferably light rail. And then also, as Denny mentioned, rail through the Sepulveda Pass. And focus on those 3 things. We put a coalition together of almost all the elected officials who represent all or part of the San Fernando Valley, Democrats and Republicans, at every level of government, business groups, not just VICA, but many others. We've even gone and talked to neighborhood councils and gotten wide support from them, and also homeowners associations. And this group has the potential of really helping the Valley speak with one voice and to make sure, as Councilman Krikorian mentioned, that the Valley gets its fair share. So it's been a big change in, I think, how the Valley approaches these issues, and I'm very proud of the role that VICA has been playing on that. Finally, we're also reaching out to other council of governments, the other regions that make up the metro area, San Fernando Valley, West Side COG. We're talking to them. We're in the process of setting up meetings, and so we do, as Denny has encouraged, talk to everybody, put together a plan that works for everyone, and yeah, grab the brass ring while it's in front of us. So, and each of the people on this panel, I think, have been playing a role in this and will continue to, and it's a real opportunity for us. So with that,
Kobe,
yes.
If I could just echo that for a moment,
Please
because
do,
I really want to put a point on how important VICA's leadership has been on this and compare it to where we were, say, in the 80s and 90s, when there was strong community opposition to the idea of having rail go through the valley. So much so that you'll all remember that Alan Robbins enacted legislation prohibiting it. That's how strong the opposition was, and it was only through it was very much through VICA's leadership in bringing the community together that sentiment has so dramatically changed. And of course, our great Assembly member Adrien Nazarian led the charge in Sacramento to finally, once and for all, get rid of that wretched Robbins bill. And so now we can start moving forward on some of these options. But it's a sea change in the Valley's stakeholders' view of what transit should look like in the Valley.
That's absolutely right, and we've played a role, but I don't want to make this too much of a mutual admiration society, but the gentleman who just spoke has not only played a great role, but also is in a position of leadership both at the City Council and on the Metro Board to make a difference, and you have done so. So we want to thank you as well. Let me completely change the subject, because we've talked a lot about Valley transit options, and I just want to hear what people think about high-speed rail, because it continues to be in the news a lot, and wondering if any of you have any opinions on whether it will be built and what will the final project look like. It could be a game changer for the San Fernando Valley in terms of if we get a station here, but I just want to get a sense of, is it going to happen, and if so, what will it look like? Professor, do you have any views on that?
It's complex, and forecasting the outcome is difficult. But I guess it's my considered opinion, after thinking about it a long time and watching what's happening, that it is going to happen, but that it's probably going to happen over a much longer time frame than had originally been hoped, and with a higher cost than had originally been hoped. And I think that means that it's very, very important to have operating segments, to think about getting to a long-range goal of a complete system in a series of useful steps that improve transportation in what the people at the high-speed rail program are calling the bookends, the northern urban area and the southern urban area. So I would hope that there would be improvements to regional rail transportation as part of building blocks toward a state system, a statewide system. And of course there is a part of the plan is for a station to exist in Burbank, and it's approximately a mile between the location of the station and the terminal at the Bob Hope Airport. And while I've actually done some analysis of this, and it doesn't appear to me, based on that analysis, that very many people will fly long distances in order to transfer in Burbank from a plane to a train, or will ride high-speed rail from a place like Fresno in order to get to Burbank to board a plane. The regional transportation connectedness of the two is probably going to be less impactful than the land use changes of having a station within a mile of another station, and the opportunity to make that a very exciting environment, to make that area a commercial and recreational restaurant kind of location, that it becomes a destination in itself. So people use the train, use it, people use the plane, use it. I don't think there'll be very many people using that high-speed train to get to a plane or vice versa.
Councilman, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, and I agree completely with the professor. I don't know whether it's going to be built as it's envisioned right now. I really don't. I think the controversy level is still too high. The skyrocketing price tag is giving people immense heartburn. But I do know that we're much better off now that the bookends are included in the discussion rather than the original completely misguided implementation plan to begin construction only in the Central Valley. The idea of putting tens of billions of dollars into a system that might only serve Modesto and Bakersfield just never made any sense to me at all. So I think that decision is going to increase the political will to do the entire system. And if it doesn't happen, at least there are useful pieces that will be part of our larger regional system. I also think that it's clearly true that people are not likely to ride high-speed rail to an airport and then fly. But the reason for this area that proximity is so important is because high-speed rail becomes such a viable alternative then to the convenience of Bob Hope Airport. Everybody loves flying out of Bob Hope Airport in this part of the valley, but that also has impacts, and there are also our capacity issues. Having an equally viable option nearby is a great way to take some of the load off of the air traffic and its local impacts on the city of Burbank and my constituents and others from that as well.
Denny, any thoughts on high-speed rail?
Well, I'm inclined to have an optimistic view. Certainly the governor has shown that this is a priority for him. He will be reelected easily. He will have significant clout in the legislature. He's already accomplished getting 25% of the anticipated cap-and-trade funds dedicated. That may or may not stand up legally. At the very least, it stands as an important political placeholder, and I think we can be sure that he'll be looking for other strategies to buttress that effort over the next 4 years, should the cap-and-trade funds be legally challenged. I'm not certain what he'll come up with. I do agree that the bookend strategy was what they should have started with. The idea that it's in jeopardy for because some claim it's inconsistent with the bond program only means to me that the folks who wrote the bond program weren't thinking very smart. But we need to and we can remedy. I think it's a real asset for the state, particularly for those who are concerned about greenhouse gases, because air carriers are, very serious sources of emissions into the stratosphere, and that makes it much more difficult to remedy. And so I think we should welcome the high-speed rail and work to make it happen and be optimistic. But there are certainly challenges.
Veronica, any thoughts?
Happy to. So we would be very supportive of this initiative. The beauty of Lyft is it works extremely well with public transit with a light rail system. So the light rail could get you maybe 90% of the way there, but you still have to solve the last mile issue. And Lyft could do that extremely well, and we are doing that in other cities very well. So in San Francisco, for example, with the Caltrain, we are able to through our technology and through the data that we have, really look at and better serve the area around the Caltrain based on the schedules and how many people are coming in, and then getting those people to wherever they need to go in the city. So we're already seeing that work really well.
Great. And I'm going to shift things a little bit once again, so we'll lurch around different transportation issues. Mayor Garcetti has talked a lot over, I guess, since he's become chairman of the Metro Board, on his goals being primarily to reduce congestion on the streets, and obviously an extremely laudable goal. And one of the things that he's been talking about is a Great Streets program and also a Grand Boulevard program. And these are all good things, both from a, VICA believes, from a livability point of view and a sustainability point of view, and perhaps would even have some congestion benefits. But one of the things that I think VICA is concerned about, in particular on here in the Valley on Van Nuys Boulevard, is that one of the things that the mayor's planners are talking about is putting in bike lanes. And while we're all for increasing the safety and ability of people to get around by bicycle, down Van Nuys we have some issues with space already, and if we're going to try to put a light rail in, the idea of dedicating additional space for a bike lane when there are probably better alternatives on neighboring streets seems to us to maybe not be the best approach. So given my editorial comment on that, I'd like to ask the panel's views on how all of these kind of streets programs might play out, and if you have any policy advice for us and for the mayor if he's listening. Denny?
Yeah, one of the concerns that we at Move LA had with Measure R was its lack of attention to investments in arterials. There was significant money in highway, 20% in the highway program, but none of that was directed to an arterial program, which from my point of view was really a missed opportunity. Measure R2, or whatever we call it, I mean, Measure R2 is a placeholder name for now, but I think it could correct that and provide, even at 5%, a very significant investment program for arterials all around the county, maybe 200 miles worth of what we would call Grand Boulevard program. I think such a program like that not only could create, and I think we have to be sensitive about this, because bus rapid transit generally requires, dedicated lanes if you're going to look at maximum efficiency, and there are serious challenges if you're going to try to do dedicated lanes on an arterial. But it can be accomplished if I think you have a long-term view and a programmatic view about it. But these boulevards are not only opportunities for automobile and transit throughput, they're also opportunities for complete streets, and we should see them that way. It doesn't mean every boulevard is an opportunity like that, because every boulevard will have some differences that might not make it appropriate. But I think we should be looking for those that do. Looking for those that do have the opportunity to be a complete streets. But more than that, they're really community development opportunities. And I think we should be looking at the funding in the cap and trade program in particular, and frankly, the legislation that recreates infrastructure finance districts where we have tax increment financing available in their transit zones, is that those two sources of funds seem to us like natural partners with the investment in infrastructure. That what Measure R2 could do for improving our infrastructure on these boulevards, the Valley Boulevard, the Vermont, the Venice, the Victory Van Owen, right? And that's just the V's, right? If we look at that as community development opportunities, we can, I think, compete well for that cap and trade money and have it help us do smart TOD and mobility hubs on these corridors in a way that could make them genuine transit throughput opportunities and genuine economic development opportunities. There are strategies, for example, TIF money, tax increment financing, can be used to fund what we call unbundled parking. One of the strategies that many communities have used for downtown revitalizations has been to take their parking and make it a common resource so that development doesn't have to bear the burden of the cost of the parking. We could do that on Grand Boulevards as well, and we could make many parts of our boulevards legitimate, viable economic development opportunities for mixed use that would be attractive even at modest rents. You don't have to have all of the development happening in the hot spots around the county. We can have moderate rent hot spots all around the county as well on grand boulevards, I think.
Professor, any
I
additional thoughts?
certainly recognize that investments in bike lanes and in what are called complete streets, a great deal of attention to pedestrian circulation as well, is the wave of the future. And the success that New York has had doing that under the leadership of Commissioner Jeanette Sada-Khan, who's been in LA and looked at our situation quite as recently as this past week. What I've learned from watching her work and from talking with her is that the fact that there are differences of opinion over the importance of incorporating a bike lane into a major boulevard, or protecting the capacity for motorized vehicles, suggests that the need for discussion, for partnership, for ongoing engagement with goodwill. So the notion that they're going to do it to us and that we're going to oppose it is the wrong way to start. The right way to start is to say, there's a role for bicycles, there's a role for buses, there's a role for automobiles. Let's sit down around the table. And she described some instances in which it was thousands of hours of negotiation, but the product was warmly welcomed by many constituencies. And I think we're still at the stage where dialogue is necessary to enable collaboration on these diverse, but yet, in the end, compatible goals.
And it's exactly on that point that I give the mayor very high marks right now, because traditionally, well, first let me just say that the Valley has been a place that has disproportionately been a danger to pedestrians and bicyclists. And there's no question that we have to do much more to enhance safety on our streets. I've had to deal in my position with too many deaths and serious injuries of pedestrians and bicyclists. So there's much more that we have to do to make our streets safer and easier for bicyclists and pedestrians. The problem has been, I think, that both internally within the Department of Transportation and within our larger community, there's been a little bit of a kind of a schizophrenic either-or viewpoint. And the metrics by which we evaluate success are, from the bicycle perspective, it's miles of bike lanes, period. That doesn't create an opportunity for the kind of collaborative work that we need to do to think about safety and mobility rather than specifying that, bike or car. We need to bring everybody to the table and work more towards getting people to transit, getting people across the valley in an easier, safer, more convenient way. Whatever that means, and we have to accommodate our bicycling and pedestrian community as well as our automotive community, and do it in a way that works for all. To threaten the opportunity to build transit infrastructure for the mere purpose of adding miles of bike lanes would be a grave mistake. You have to figure out how those two things can work together.
Thank you. Veronica, as I think you've pointed out, increasing investment in transit is great, but we still continue, especially in a place with such large distances between major lines, the last mile problem. And ride-sharing companies, including Lyft, of course, are really changing the way a lot of people approach on-demand car services and car sharing and that sort of thing. What kind of long-term impacts do you anticipate that companies like yours will have on our transportation system?
Certainly. And I'll kind of build off the last question as well, because I think we were talking a little bit about congestion. So going back and reorienting around our mission, our long-term vision, we're proactively pushing ways to alleviate congestion. So in San Francisco 2 months ago and in Los Angeles this week, we went live with a new product called Lift Line. And what it does is it pulls people together who are in similar origins and going to similar destinations into the same lift. So whereas 2 people would typically take 2 separate lifts to get to that place, we are now putting them in the same car. So we are immediately alleviating extra cars on the road. This is exactly where we want to move to, where we are creating a very real-time ride-sharing and carpooling system that is infinite in its possibilities, infinite in its routes. So it's very early. We'll see what happens. We've only been testing this for a matter of weeks in San Francisco and now this first week in LA, but we're really excited about it. To your broader question about how this changes transportation, I think there's a lot of things that can happen. We are seeing millennials, for example, feel very differently about what it means to own a vehicle. So whereas folks would, view the purchase of their first vehicle as a symbol of freedom, now they have their smartphone. So it no longer represents the same thing that it used to. So that's going to change behavior. It's also very expensive. It's very expensive to own a vehicle and to own a second vehicle. If you can give folks the option to not have to take on that expense, which is typically between 8 and 12 grand a year, that's a huge amount of options you're opening up and resources. So, I think that's going to have some impact on what it means to own a car, and if it's as necessary for everyone as we've always thought, which, when you look at traffic and the environment, may not be the worst thing.
Okay. I think most people know that I'm a huge supporter of transit, obviously, but at the same time, here in the Valley, we have, I guess, four or five, depending on how you count it, major freeways, and we haven't seen any upgrades in those freeways in a long time. And the 101, which I spend way more time on than I would like to, in particular, is in need of some kind of expansion, which has been stymied, I think, in some respect by the understandable reluctance of people who live right next to the 101 to see any expansion there. Just wondering if any people on this panel have any thoughts about how, while at the same time we continue to invest in transit, we can make our highways work better.
The principal way that we will be making our highways work better in the coming decade is very closely related to Lyft. It's the better integration of information with travel. So knowing what the conditions are and knowing what alternate routes are, one can drive more wisely. We're not likely to expand the highway capacity physically, but electronically we can expand its capacity functionally by giving us information to avoid this area of the highway at this hour and consider an alternative. And those alternatives should include transit. What we're developing over time is a dramatically improved transportation system in terms of the numbers of options available to us. And for most of us, for most trips, the best option at a given time remains driving. But when we can use Lyft, when we can use transit, when we can use a bicycle, we're improving the functioning of the whole system as well as its value to us individually. And I think the principal way that we're going to get there is by having more ubiquitous information on current conditions that we use when we make our travel decisions.
So in other words, Waze and Google Maps.
Yeah, and beyond that, yeah.
Well,
I'm working with Caltrans right now on an app which would say, there's an incident occurring right now. It'll say this to you in your car verbally. There's an incident that just occurred. By the way, there's a park and ride lot with capacity that's 3 miles from where you are. Why don't you consider that right now? And we'll reserve a space for you there if you opt for it. You have to do all of this, but it's very challenging. You have to do all of this without getting engaged in distracted driving. You know, you don't want somebody to be talking into their cell phone when there's an incident.
Or causing one.
But there are ways of, that's the direction we're moving in. Let's say it's not working yet, but that's I think, coming.
Denny?
Well, I think we should be focusing attention in terms of the freeway system on state of good repair rather than on expansion, and that we should be looking to investments in alternatives like transit to address issues like overcrowding and congestion on the freeways, as well as strategies that are car sharing oriented. My guess is that the body politic is agreeing with that increasingly as well. So I would think that we would want to make sure that our systems are well repaired before we try to expand them.
All right, I think we've got some time for a few questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
I have a question for Professor Wax or anyone else on the panel. You mentioned at the beginning the concept of mileage-based user fees as a mechanism to deal with the fact that, you know, gas tax, as cars become more fuel efficient, don't produce what they formerly did. My understanding was that Oregon was going to start using that sort of a mileage-based user fee, and I'm wondering, is that correct? Have they actually done it? What's been the response? Is it working?
First of all, there was a trial in Oregon that had about a small number of people, about 3,500 people. And it worked so that when you drove into a gas station and your car was appropriately equipped, the gas tax was zeroed out, and instead you were charged, when you fueled your vehicle, for the number of miles that you drove. People were asked whether this was effective, whether it bothered them, and so on. And in general, it was very warmly received. People said it was not inconvenient. They didn't feel that their privacy was violated or what have you. In fact, the record keeping was in their vehicle. There was no central repository. So based upon that, the Oregon legislature has now approved, and they're in the process of implementing a larger experiment which will have hundreds of thousands of participants and will start at the middle of next year. And it's being very carefully watched. It's being so carefully watched that a consortium of states in the West, including California, is now studying it carefully. And I mentioned SB 1077. The governor signed it this week. It will create a task force to investigate doing a pilot study in California. All of this is so delicate that, you know, we're always investigating and doing pilots because there are people who are very bothered and concerned about the privacy questions more than any other. But there are other questions, too, about the transition. That it's very complex. And I don't think it's actually going to occur on a sort of a national scale for like 2 decades, but we're in the beginning of a transition.
Yes, Mr. Rodin.
This is largely for Professor Wax, although I'm sure that Mr. Krikorian will have observations as well. I sat on an aviation task force down in Skag for not the last RTP, but the one before that. Now, I can't remember what year it is to save my life. But at that point in time, the high-speed rail was being proposed as an alternative to airlines because the traffic between Los Angeles International and Burbank and San Francisco was very heavy, and the high-speed rail would relieve a lot of the pressure on LAX. And this was discussed. It went so far as to go to the finance committee at SCAG, where it really blew up. And what I'm curious about is that the high-speed rail proposed then was really a 200-mile-an-hour high-speed rail that would leave the change in the model damaged the high-speed rail to the point where it may not make the sense that it did when it was an airline?
For me?
I think so.
I think no. I think that the interest in the high-speed rail among many cities has kept it alive rather than killed it. And I think that that it is likely that it will draw passengers from intercity air travel, but that it is likely that it will draw a larger number from road travel. Remember that the high-speed rail will go from downtown to downtown, and business travelers traveling alone will go from city center to city center. Foreign tourists may go city center to city center. But much of our travel also is group travel and family travel, and automobiles are very important for that. And having an automobile at the end of the trip is very important. In addition, when you compare it with air travel, you can fly from Burbank to San Jose or from Oakland to Long Beach, and the high-speed rail is going to go from city center to city center. So I don't see it as threatening the air market as much as I do adding another option for travel in the state when the state's population will be tens of millions higher than it is now. Yes, right now, one could say the problems that we have in California can be summarized as intra-urban traffic congestion and intercity goods movement, and high-speed rail for passengers addresses neither of those. But looking in the long range at a more economically integrated state with more business and high-end travel, it begins to look more promising. And the fact that many other cities have wanted to be a part of it, I think, has kept it alive rather than dampened it.
Any other panelists have views on this?
Well, one of the observations, back in the SCAG envisioning days of that, the system envisioned was a maglev system, which was considerably more expensive than even the system we're looking at now. So I think that does make a difference. A significant part of its role would have been to facilitate the development of Ontario Airport. When we talk regional, the number one regional alternative to LAX was Ontario Airport, which still has a fine facility and interestingly already has the runways capable of landing the A380 safely. We don't need to spread the runways at LAX. To do that, we could do that in Ontario, and since most of the A380 carriers are Asian carriers, I think actually Ontario Airport and a high-speed connection into downtown Los Angeles and then up to the valley here would be, I think, a pretty interesting economic proposition. So I would like to see us envision keeping that alive as part of the economic development strategy for the urban environment.
Could I ask Denny a question?
Sure.
I think that Denny has to leave shortly because he's got to catch a plane, and I wanted to ask him, I wanted to follow up on something he said earlier, and I don't want to let him get away without asking the question. Forgive me for interrupting. But when you spoke of a new measure, sales tax measure, you didn't address the possibility that between now and November of 2015, there might
2016.
actually be a change in the voter threshold, in the two-thirds requirement. Is that something that you see as politically feasible?
Yes. Well, the first thing for me to say is my flight's been canceled, so I'm here.
That's why your phone was buzzing.
That's why I'm, yeah,
If
so
you had
I'm busily
high-speed
looking,
rail,
is there an
you'd be
alternative?
going.
You know, so the Envisioning California Conference in Sacramento will go on without me. They'll be fine.
Their losses are our gain.
They'll be fine. The 55% lower voter threshold polled a lot better prior to the successful reform of California governments when, for example, we got a majority vote for the budget and changes to term limits and various changes in our districting and the way elections are conducted, and things stabilized in Sacramento a bit. the polling lost about 4 or 5 points on what was very promising results earlier. It was running about 58% yes, and now it was running about 52%. Now, we expected that, and that idea could come back on the table, but the bigger barrier became the basically loss of 3 seats, 3 Democratic seats in the state Senate. You need 2/3 vote to get this on the ballot, and so it, is something that will have to wait the outcome of this November and other issues going forward. Certainly, it's possible to envision this in November 2016, and there are very powerful and important constituencies who are eager to see it happen. It is also possible to envision it, for example, as principally a transportation measure, and including a clause that would make any concurrent measure subject to its terms, meaning if it was on the 2016 ballot as well, then our local measure could be, if that statewide measure passed, our local measure could be a 55% measure. But that, that might be me just dreaming outside the box, but it certainly is a possibility if after the first of the year polling shows that it's promising. I'm quite confident that the state building trades and other interests are going to be considering a strategy.
Thank you.
Any other yes?
I have a bit of a micro question. We're living in an era where people often consider it child endangerment to send their kids to public school, let alone ride public transportation. And I know I sort of feel like letting my kids ride the buses and the subway, just from the reaction that their friends give them and their parents are aghast at the, almost sometimes feel like they should be arrested for child endangerment. But I think this is an important piece of our culture, certainly in Los Angeles. Is it in New York City, and they're 10 years old, 8-year-olds riding, they don't think anything about it. In Los Angeles, if you send a 12-year-old kid on the red line, everybody thinks about it a lot. People look at you like you're out of place. So I think, I guess I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts about how we adjust our culture a little bit to let people know how safe our world is, actually, instead of so dangerous.
I think your last sentence is really important because people don't understand how safe they really are. In Los Angeles, we have the lowest crime rate that we've had since I was a little kid, and no one knows that. Everybody thinks that crime is skyrocketing because they watch the evening news and they see some horrible crime that happened in Kansas City, and when it's in their living room, it seems as though it was right around the corner. So people really don't have a sense of context about crime anymore.
Let me say one other thing, Paul, is that even my kids, I'm sorry to say, Lyft, they like the name of the other people better.
That's fine.
So, but I believe that there's some legality with younger than 16-year-old kids riding I don't even know what category to call it, the Ubers around. So that's also, that's a, I don't know whose law that is, that you can't, kids can take kids, but that's also part of the perception that you say about how safe kids are out managing themselves in our
At Metro, I think everybody acknowledges that, establishing passenger safety is the first priority of all. And letting people feel as though they're safe is probably a close second to that. Making them safe and then making them realize that they're safe are the most important things. And it is very relevant to ridership. That being said, I think particularly if you are on any of our bus lines anywhere in the valley, you'll see them filled with students all the time. I mean, there is a lot of youth ridership. On the ride-sharing issue, I don't want to divert the conversation here into a whole, another kettle of fish, but there have been some legitimate concerns raised that some of the companies are very much trying to address right now, and the legislature is also trying to address about not knowing who your driver is in a ride-sharing situation, as opposed to in a more regulated industry like the taxi industry, where there have been a long history of background investigations and so forth. That's going to have to still be worked out, and I know the companies are trying to figure that part of their business model out, and the legislature and the PUC is as well. But from the transit side, we've been working hard to create that sense of security that people should have when they ride the line. And I've ridden a lot. I ride a lot, and I ride. I almost never feel any threat to my security, and it sometimes surprises me, because no matter where I go in town, no matter what line I'm on, I always feel like we're doing a pretty good job. But it's got to be priority number one to make sure that people are safe and that they feel safe.
Just a quick comment on that. If in a few cities in the United States, Colorado Springs comes to mind, children, youths, not little kids, but middle school and on, have been given subsidized transit passes, and their parents have to drive them to soccer practice and so on a bit less. And the fact that it exists as a municipal program on a reasonably large scale makes it much more acceptable. Kids go to the mall on the bus, and their parents know that other kids are doing the same thing. You describe it as a cultural issue, and it is, but we can address it more broadly than just, it's happened in several cities, but really just a few.
To elaborate a little bit, we have additional resources coming in this direction from the Cap and Trade program. Cap and Trade has about 5% of its funding, and this is not a small amount of funding we're talking about. The Cap and Trade program is projected to statewide generate $3 to $5 billion a year. 5% of that will be for transit operations. In general, it has to be used for new riders, new service, because otherwise, if you're just supporting existing service, you're really not getting emission reductions from it. So one of the options that Metro could consider is strategies that includes transit passes, even more broadly. So if you have, for example, an opportunity in cap and trade funding, and you have an opportunity, for example, and you do ballot measure funding, there is also another source at an agency called the MSRC. Anybody ever heard of that? MSRC is an agency that exists solely to distribute about $17 million a year in air quality grants. You put those three sources together, you have a very, I think, you're really capable of putting together a very reasonably, economically viable, even maybe universal student transit pass program in LA County. There are communities, Chicago comes to mind, Seattle, where there are universal passes for students that are really just basically part of the boilerplate of the culture. I think we can address this, and the idea that there are more children, that they are there together, I think is very much a helpful thing in making that come to pass.
Unfortunately, that is about all the time we have for this panel. I'd like again to thank our track sponsors, Caruso Affiliate and Southwest Airlines, as well as our panel sponsors, Kinkishario and Lyft. Let's please now give a round of applause for a great panel. Please be sure to take those pink slips, fill out the exit survey, give it to a VICA staff member, turn it in at the registration table. Next panel starts at 11 a.m., so in the meantime, be sure to fill out your bingo card, visit our exhibitors, and we'll be giving out prizes later, including a ticket on Southwest or Seaport Airlines. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.